Yeah.
Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert, bringing you some of the best college football news, predictions, and analysis. And today, taking another look at a program that fired their head coach in the middle of the 2019 season. And of course, we are talking about the Florida State Seminoles, who will be one of just two ACC teams with a brand new head coach in 2020. Back on November 3rd, Florida State fired Willie Taggart less than 2 years into his time in Tallahassee, following a 27-10 home loss to Miami. And of course, losing to your rival in Miami like that at home against a Miami team that was pretty much just mediocre in 2019, definitely unacceptable, as were the results that Willie Taggart provided in his very short term down in Tallahassee. He went just 9-12 overall during his time with Florida State, and that includes a 6-9 mark in ACC conference play. So losing records across the board. We knew that when he came in back at the beginning of 2018 that he was not going to make Florida State playoff contenders right off the bat, but we did expect them to contend a little bit better. This is a Florida State program, guys, that has very, very high standards and has very solid athletes as well. They always have very, very talented athletes there, but you have to have the right coaches to develop those athletes and to contend in the right way. So 9-12 in less than 2 years. A losing record in 2018. After that loss to Miami, it dropped Florida State to 4-5. That's just not acceptable by Florida State standards. A program that has historically been one of the best in college football history, one of the most tradition-rich and most successful in college football history, to just barely be making bowl games, to have losing records, that's not acceptable. And if you do that, you will not stay there long. It was also a very questionable hire by the Seminoles. You know, Willie Taggart spent 1 year at Oregon where he went mediocre, 7-5, before leaving to take this Florida State job. And even after that one season at Oregon, Taggart still had a losing record overall in his entire coaching career. So there were many doubts and concerns by bringing Willie Taggart in. Even though he wanted to coach the Seminoles, there were a lot of questions about him coming in. And obviously, those concerns and those questions were valid because he was not the right man for the job. The Seminoles finished out 2019 with a 6-7 record. Odell Haggins, who served as interim a few years ago when Jimbo Fisher bolted for Texas A&M, he served as interim this time around, went 2-1 to finish the regular season, but Florida State lost to Arizona State in their bowl game to finish 2019 6-7 for their second straight losing season. Once again, unacceptable by Florida State standards. I think we can all agree with that. So they fire Willie Taggart. Florida State needed someone desperately to come in and right the ship. They need someone to come in, rejuvenate this program, rejuvenate this fan base that fairly recently had won a national championship all the way back in 2013. Back in 2014, made the college football playoff, but it's kind of fallen off a little bit, both nationally and in ACC play. Clemson has kind of taken over as the king of the conference. They needed someone big, and I think they got that guy. Mike Norvell, coming over from Memphis. The Seminoles hiring him to become the next head coach of Florida State back on December 8th. And Norvell had a remarkable run during his time with the Tigers in the American Athletic Conference. Norvell going 38-15 in 4 years at Memphis. That includes a 24-8 mark in AAC conference play. That includes 3 straight Western Division titles for Memphis and a 12-1 mark in 2019, which included a Cotton Bowl berth. Of course, Norvell did not coach in that game, but also an American Athletic Conference championship. Finally getting that championship, that conference championship that had eluded him for his very short time with the Tigers. And the thing with Mike Norvell, guys, is that he is a brilliant offensive mind. He's a fairly young coach. He was one of those up-and-coming coaches that after you saw his success at a Group of 5 school, you knew sooner rather than later he was going to be taking that next step forward, jumping to a Power 5 program, one that was going to be elite. Some thought he might go somewhere in the SEC, maybe Missouri, maybe Arkansas. Florida State was always in the mix, and he made it very clear that he wanted to go coach down in Tallahassee. He made it very clear that, yes, I will entertain the thought of coaching in the SEC, and I will entertain the thought of maybe coaching the Big 10, Big 12, somewhere around there, but I want to go to Florida State. That's where I want to coach, and his wish was granted. We said he's an offensive-minded coach. Listen to these numbers. 2019, we saw Memphis have the 8th ranked scoring offense, averaging 40.4 points per game. That was the 3rd time in the past 4 years that Memphis averaged 40 points per game or more over the course of a season. He has coached phenomenal offensive talent, both quarterbacks and running back. Quarterbacks like Riley Ferguson and Brady White. Running backs like Darrell Henderson and Kenneth Gainwell. And some will say, well, those guys are just playing in the AAC. They're just playing in the American Athletic Conference. Could those guys play in the SEC? Could they play at Florida State for that matter? And I would say absolutely. Absolutely they could. Those guys were playing phenomenal football, and I do not think they would play that well. I do not think you would have seen the development and the progression in those players' games, and that's just to name a few of the big ones, had it not been for Mike Norvell and his offensive mind and his offensive schemes. So Florida State has got themselves a good one, and they desperately need it because they have struggled mightily offensively over these past few years, never really finding consistency, especially at the quarterback position. So let's take a look at their 2020 outlook. We've kind of broken down why Florida State was put in this position, the abysmal era that was Willie Taggart. We figured out who they've got, which is Mike Norvell. So what should we expect from him in 2020? I can tell you, Seminole fans, don't expect to go contend for an ACC title crown. Right now, it is Clemson's conference to lose. North Carolina's up and coming. Miami could contend. De'Aaron King, Manny Diaz desperately needing a big year in 2020. So plenty of teams that could improve drastically, Florida State being one of them. But nobody right now that I see can really dethrone Clemson. But Florida State right now, Mike Norvell in a very short amount of time brought in the 22nd ranked recruiting class in 2020. Once again, he was hired on December 8th, so he had a very short time to get working with the early signing period, and then, of course, National Signing Day taking place back in February, bringing in a fairly solid class, a top 25 recruiting class. They lose their star running back in Cam Akers, who had over 1,100 rushing yards in 2019, and to me, that's extremely impressive, considering the offensive line woes that Florida State faced all season long, considering how poor the offense played altogether. To have a running back in Cam Akers that was still able to eclipse over 1,100 yards and really was the workhorse and anchor for this team, not too bad. So that's going to be a major loss for them offensively. But I will say that Florida State does return a very solid and experienced defense. And so that is something that I really think benefits Mike Norvell, because Memphis never had strong defenses. They were mediocre. They weren't bad. But they relied on their offense to bail them out. They relied on their offense to put up so many points that eventually the defense might get a stop. You force one turnover, you get a couple punts in there, the offense is going to take care of business. That's not going to fly in the ACC. It's very, very different. So Florida State returns a lot of experience defensively, which means Mike Norvell can focus a little more offensively here. Develop this offense, pair it with a solid defense. Florida State could be in for a solid 2020 season, a major bounce-back season compared to the previous two that they have had. The biggest thing you're going to be looking at offensively is, yes, you have to find a new workhorse at the running back position after the loss of Cam Akers, but who's going to be playing quarterback? Who's going to be playing quarterback? Will it be James Blackman, who has been really up and down in his entire Florida State career, 17 touchdowns to 11 interceptions in 2019? Or will it be arguably the biggest recruit that Mike Norvell landed in 2020, and that is Chubba Purdy, a very dangerous dual-threat quarterback, a highly touted recruit that was originally committed to Louisville. He ended up getting switched to Florida State to come play for Mike Norvell and his staff. Huge get for Florida State, and I can guarantee you that Purdy will automatically be in contention for that starting quarterback job in 2020. James Blackman really didn't get the job done very well in 2019. Purdy's going to give him a long run for his money. So a major quarterback battle taking place down in Tallahassee, something you want to keep your eye on. The quarterback has been the key for Mike Norvell's offenses at Memphis. Ferguson was phenomenal. White has been the anchor of that offense the past few years. Getting a solid quarterback in place early is going to be key to the success for Florida State in 2020. And you've got a very good battle that's going to be taking place this spring that, of course, we will be touching on later on. When you look at their schedule, not too bad. Of course, the ACC has been called the weakest of the Power 5 conferences. Of course, like we said, you've got Clemson up at the top. No one's really going to beat them, at least not yet. And then you've got a couple mediocre teams, maybe a couple teams that could contend. You know, we saw Virginia make the Orange Bowl. We expect Miami to do better. North Carolina doing extremely well, but no one at the level of Clemson, which means Florida State can contend for one of the top spots in the ACC standings. Maybe not first, but maybe a top 3, top 4 finish. When you look at their notable games, they opened the season in Atlanta, taking on West Virginia. That's a very intriguing matchup. Right off the bat, you're facing a Power 5 opponent. Neil Brown, of course, coming into year 2 with the Mountaineers and saw them take some pretty major strides, especially towards the end of 2019. So certainly not a game that Mike Norvell and the Seminoles can overlook down in Atlanta. Should be a fun one and something that, you know, when you open the season that early against a Power 5 opponent, it really shows you what your team's made of. You know, there's no room for error. You don't get to play this cupcake team in week 1 where you can afford to have a bunch of mistakes and still win by 40. This is the game that Florida State, really, you're going to see how the quarterback plays, how well the defense plays, how experienced are they, and then how well they're adjusting to Mike Norvell's offense. So that's going to be a fun one to watch down in Atlanta. We have a game at Boise State that's going to be a lot of fun. Of course, that was supposed to be a neutral site game last year. Due to some weather, it was moved to Tallahassee. Boise State came all the way back and won in that week 1 victory against the Seminoles. The Seminoles going all the way out to Boise, playing on the blue field. Should be a really fun one. Boise State, of course, one of the most dominant group of 5 teams we have seen really in history, especially over these past 2 decades. And then the Seminoles host both Clemson and Florida, both teams that would be competing for spots in the college football playoff. And yes, we did say Florida will be competing for a spot in the college football playoff. Dan Mullen, this is the year that if they want to get there, if they want to get over the hump and defeat Georgia, win the East, maybe even win the entire SEC, they need to do it this year. And they certainly have the talent to do so. And luckily for Florida State, they host both of those programs. So very interesting schedule there. Those are just a few of the big ones, some of the highlights. Of course, they need to take care of business in the rest of ACC conference play just to try to get a winning season and start the Mike Norvell era off on the right foot. So what would we grade this hire? What do we want to give the hire of Mike Norvell down at Florida State? A hire that the administration could not afford to lose. A hire they could not afford to mess up. Florida State football has not been the best state these past few seasons, dating all the way back really to 2017. And they really need to get back on track to both relevancy in the ACC and nationally. We are giving this hire of Mike Norvell a B+. It is not quite good enough to be an A. And I will tell you what, this grade could have been very different had Norvell been hired somewhere else. And when I mean different, I mean lower. I don't think had Mike Norvell gotten hired by an Arkansas, by a Missouri, by an Ole Miss, a Mississippi State, someone like that, I don't think that I would have been as impressed. I don't think it would have worked out. But I think this Florida State scenario, what Mike Norvell is walking into, is a little bit better than maybe what he was going to walk into at one of those respective SEC programs. Another thing is that he not desperately, but he wanted Florida State. Sure, yeah, I'll go coach in the SEC, but if he doesn't want to go there, then don't take him. He wanted to come to Tallahassee, and as we've said in a couple of these other coaching hires, that goes a long way. Coaches that want to be at their respective schools, that means something, and Norvell wants to be with the Seminoles. I believe he has the scheme, the mind, and the mentality to give the Seminoles a spark on offense that they desperately need, and I wholeheartedly believe that in a few years, he can have Florida State back to national relevancy. I 100% believe that. We saw him do that with Memphis. And he did it with some of his players. It wasn't all Justin Fuente's players. He did it with some of his players. And he made them practically a small dynasty down in Memphis, winning AAC Western Division title multiple times in a row, finally capturing the conference title this past year. And I believe that he can do that at Florida State in a very short amount of time. So 2020, a very telling year for Florida State, but brighter days are really coming. Without a doubt in my mind, Mike Norvell is going to turn the ship around. B+ higher for the Seminoles. Can't wait to see what he has in store for us in this 2020 season. So guys, thank you so much for watching us here at the Gridiron Expert. Make sure to like this video and check out everything we have for you in the description below. We have got more coaching hire content, quarterback transfer content, live streams, and predictions coming up very soon that you do not want to miss. So make sure you check all of that out. And once again, as always, thank you for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you next time on the Gridiron Expert.